Mafia boss met his ex 3 years later on Christmas Eve. His daughter said 3 words that made him freeze. The fluorescent lights of the St. Jude Community Shelter hummed a flat, buzzing note against the concrete walls. It was a sound I'd come to associate with safety. Outside, the Brooklyn snow was falling thick and fast, a clean white blanket over the grime. But in here, it was damp and smelled of industrial soup and wet wool. My name is Isabella. I am 27 years old. 3 years ago, I ceased to exist. I tugged a string of flimsy silver tinsel straight on the drooping branches of a donated pine tree. It was Christmas Eve, and my job as the volunteer coordinator was to make this gymnasium look less like a gymnasium and more like, well, anything else. Isabella Carmen, one of the overnight staffers, called from the kitchen doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. The stew is thin, but we've got enough bread to fill a hearse. You think it's enough? I turned, forcing a smile that felt tight on my cold skin. It's perfect, Carmen. It's warm and it's free. That's enough. She nodded, her tired eyes crinkling. You're a good kid, Isabella. I wasn't a kid. I was a mother in the corner, bundled in a pink snowsuit, even though we were indoors. My daughter was sitting on a plastic mat stacking worn wooden blocks. Sophia, she was 2 years old. Her hair was a wild mess of dark curls, and her eyes, when she looked up at me, were a deep, startling shade of gray-green. My eyes are brown. I walked over and knelt beside her, smoothing her hair. Having fun, Bambina, I whispered, catching the slip. I tried not to use the old words. Sophia just pointed at her lopsided tower. Up, she said, her voice a serious murmur. Up, I kissed her forehead. Her skin was warm. She was the only warm thing left in my world. This quiet life was a fortress I had built brick by painstaking brick. A tiny third-floor walk-up with rattling windows and a landlord who took cash. A job here at the shelter that paid almost nothing but offered anonymity. We were ghosts, Sophia and I. We had no history, no family, no contact with the man who was her father. He didn't even know she existed. That was the point. I had run from New York not just to save myself, but to save her. I had run from the penthouse apartments, the armored cars, the smell of gunpowder, and expensive cologne. I had run from the man I loved because that love was a death sentence. I checked my watch. The doors would open at 6 o'clock for the community dinner. Families were already lining up outside, stamping their feet in the snow. Okay, my love, I murmured to Sophia, scooping her up. She wrapped her small arms around my neck and buried her face in my scarf. Let's go check the donations one more time. I carried her to the back office, a small, cluttered room where donated toys were piled high. My breath hitched just for a second. Christmas. The last Christmas I had spent with him. It was different. It was diamonds at my throat and a private jet to someplace warm. It was lies whispered over champagne. I shook the memory away. It was poison. That life was over. That man was gone. Or so I had thought. Across the city in a place that scraped the sky, Luca Romano stood in front of a window that was not a window. It was a solid wall of glass 20 feet high looking down on the city that was his, or rather the city that was his. Again, he was 34 years old and he felt like 1,000. 3 years. 3 years of hiding in the Sicilian mountains in damp, cold stone villas, waiting. 3 years of listening to coded messages on burner phones, wondering which of his men would be the next to be found floating in the harbor. 3 years of healing. The assassination attempt had been sloppy but effective. His own second-in-command, Vincent, had rigged his car. Luca survived only because he had paused to take a call, standing just outside the vehicle when it erupted in fire and metal. The blast had thrown him 30 feet, shattering his left leg and embedding shrapnel in his back. Vincent was dead now. Luca had seen to that himself. The week he returned to New York, he had cleaned house, as his father used to say. The organization was his fully and finally, but the scars remained. He rubbed his left hand, a reflexive gesture. The skin was puckered in tight, a permanent reminder. His leg ached whenever the weather turned, a dull throb that kept time with his pulse. Boss, a voice said from behind him. Luca didn't turn. He just watched the snow fall on the city. Antonio, his new consigliere, though he avoided the old titles, stepped forward, holding a single manila envelope. He came an hour ago to the front desk. No name. Luca finally turned. Antonio was a good man, young, quiet, loyal. He hadn't been part of the old crew. What is it? A tip, Antonio said, his face impassive. I think you need to see it. Luca took the envelope. Inside was a single grainy photograph, clearly taken with a long lens. It showed a woman, her hair pulled back, carrying a toddler on her hip. She was walking into a rundown building in Brooklyn. The air left Luca's lungs. He gripped the photo, his knuckles white, the world tilted. Isabella, he whispered. It was impossible. He had searched for her after the bombing. After he knew Vincent was a traitor, he had used every resource to find her. He assumed Vincent had gotten to her first. He had mourned her. He had buried her in his mind alongside every other decent thing he had ever touched. We don't know if it's real, Antonio said gently. It could be a trap. The timing is convenient. Christmas Eve. Someone wants you distracted or they want you in the open. Luca didn't hear him. He was staring at the woman's face, the cheap coat, the exhaustion in her posture. It was her, but she looked broken. His voice was a low growl. Jude Community Shelter, Brooklyn. They're hosting a dinner tonight for the homeless. A shelter. The woman who wore silk and laughed at his darkest jokes in a shelter. It's a trap, Lucas said, crushing the photo in his scarred hand. He wanted it to be a trap. It was cleaner than the alternative that she had left him. That she had run from him and chosen this probably. Antonio agreed. But I have to go. Luca's mind was already moving. He couldn't go as Luca Romano. His return to the city was still a tremor in the underworld. The legitimate press hadn't caught on yet, but they were sniffing around. The fundraiser, the one my mother's foundation is sponsoring. Is that tonight? Antonio nodded. Yes, the mayor's office is expecting you. A quick photo op show the city the Romano family is still about charity. Change it, Luca commanded, walking to his desk. Tell them I'm making a last-minute donation somewhere else, someplace that needs it more. Antonio understood instantly. The shelter in Brooklyn. Get the car. No security. Just you. And find me a name. Someone unassuming. Torres from the accounting department. Luca looked back at the window. The city lights blurring. I'm going to be a philanthropist. The front doors of the shelter opened at 6 o'clock sharp. The gymnasium filled quickly. The warmth of human bodies fought back against the cold. And the smell of the soup and fresh bread made the room feel almost festive. I was stationed at the donation table near the front. Sophia settled in a playpen behind me. Drowsy and quiet, I smiled at the families, checked their names off a list, and handed out toy vouchers for the children. My smile was an ache. My feet hurt. Around 7, a few local press members showed up. A city councilwoman was here ladling soup for the cameras. It was all part of the game. Then the air in the room changed. It wasn't a sound. It was a drop in pressure. The chatter near the doorway quieted. People instinctively moved aside. I looked up from my list, and I forgot how to breathe. He was standing in the doorway, older, harder. He wore a simple black wool coat, but it fit him in a way that screamed money. His hair was shorter. There was a faint silver-white line cutting through his left eyebrow that hadn't been there before. Luca, my blood turned to ice. It was a physical sensation, a painful freeze that started in my chest and shot down my limbs. He was here. He wasn't dead. My first instinct was primal. I spun around, my body shielding the playpen. Sophia, he can't see her. He can't know. Isabella, you okay? Carmen asked from beside me. I couldn't speak. I just nodded, my throat clamped shut. I turned back, forcing my hands to stop shaking. I kept my head down, focusing on the donation list. Be invisible. Be a ghost. He doesn't know you're here. He's here for the politician. He'll leave. I could feel him scanning the room. I knew that feeling. It was the way he used to look for me in a crowded restaurant. A possessive, heavy gaze that claimed everything it landed on. I risked a glance. He was speaking to the shelter director, a fake, charming smile plastered on his face. He looked tired and dangerous. The rumors I had heard, the whispers of betrayal and exile, they were true. He was a man who had walked through fire. And now he was 20 feet away from my daughter. Luca Romano hated charity. He hated politicians. And he hated being touched by strangers. This gymnasium was his personal hell. Torres, this is an incredible surprise. The director, a nervous man with a bad tie, was saying, this donation will keep our doors open through the winter. Just happy to help, Lucas said. The name Torres felt thick and false on his tongue. The press cameras flashed. He smiled. It felt like pulling glass across his skin. He had scanned the room 3 times. No, Isabella. The tip was a fake, a bad joke. He felt a sharp, bitter relief immediately followed by a wave of crushing disappointment. He didn't know which one was worse. He had been a fool to come. If you'll just follow me, Mr. Torres, the councilwoman would love a photo. Luca nodded, his eyes sweeping the room one last time. He was done. He was leaving. And then he saw her. She was standing behind a table piled with cheap blankets. Her hair was pulled back in a simple, severe ponytail. She was wearing a faded flannel shirt. She wasn't the woman he remembered. She was less and more. His heart stopped. It simply ceased to beat. She wasn't a ghost. She was real. She was alive. All the air in the room, all the sound, all the people, they vanished. There was only her. She looked up and her eyes met his. He saw it. Not love, not longing. Pure unadulterated terror. She immediately looked away, her body tensing, turning slightly, as if to shield something behind her. Lucas started walking. He didn't care about the cameras. He didn't care about the director calling his false name. He just moved. The 3 years of pain, the exile, the betrayal, it all dissolved into one single burning question. Why did you run from me? I saw him coming. Each step was a hammer blow against my ribs. I couldn't run. Where would I go? This was my life. I bent down, my movements jerky, and began organizing pamphlets on the table. Don't look at him. Don't speak to him. He's a stranger. He stopped right in front of my table. I could smell him. That same scent, wool, expensive soap, and something metallic, something dangerous. Hello, Isabella, he said. His voice, it was lower than I remembered, rougher, like gravel. I kept my head down. I'm sorry, I said, my voice thin and ready. Do I know you? A low, humorless sound vibrated in his chest. I finally looked up. His eyes were the same, a dark, piercing blue that saw everything. The scar over his eye was new. His face was leaner, the angle sharper. You're not supposed to be here, I whispered, my hands trembling. Neither are you, he shot back. A shelter. This is what you left me for. The insult barely registered. All I could think about was the small, sleeping child 10 feet behind me. Please, Luca, go. Not until you talk to me, he said, his voice low and intense. 3 years, Isabella. I thought you were dead. I thought he killed you. He stopped. His gaze had shifted. It moved from my face to something over my shoulder. His expression, it fractured. The anger, the confusion, it all shattered and reformed into something I had never seen on his face before. I knew before I even turned what he was seeing. Sophia had woken up. She was standing in the playpen, her hands gripping the mesh siding. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the tall, dark man who was making her mommy scared. She had my dark hair, but her eyes were his. They were that startling, devastating gray-green. And when she looked at him, it was like looking in a mirror. The silence stretched between us, a gulf of shock and disbelief. Luca's face went through a dozen emotions in the span of a second. Confusion, recognition, wonder, and then a terrible, profound grief. My daughter, he whispered, the words torn from somewhere deep in his chest. She's mine. I couldn't speak. I couldn't move. I just watched him stare at her. This man who had never wanted children, who had said family was a weakness, who had built his life on violence and solitude. And Sophia, my beautiful, innocent Sophia, stared back at him with those eyes that were undeniably his. She pointed at him, her voice clear and curious. Mama, who's that man? The question broke something in me. I rushed to the playpen, scooped her up, and held her against my chest like a shield. I turned to face Luca, my voice fierce despite my terror. Stay away from us. But it was too late. He had seen her. He knew. And the look on his face, the raw, unguarded love and loss, told me that our life of hiding was over. We need to talk, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Now, not here, I said, clutching Sophia tighter. She was everything to me, and now she was everything to him too. Not ever. Isabella, he stepped closer, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I have spent 3 years in hell, thinking you were dead. 3 years believing I had lost the only good thing I ever had. And now I find out you've been alive, that I have a daughter I never knew existed. We are going to talk, whether you want to or not. The gymnasium around us had faded into background noise. There were only the 3 of us, caught in the wreckage of the past and the uncertain terror of the future. Sophia looked between us, sensing the tension, her small face beginning to crumple. "Mama, scary," she whispered, burying her face against my neck. Luca's expression softened at the sound of her voice. Something in his eyes shifted, became gentle, almost reverent. "I'm not going to hurt you, Bambina," he said softly, using the same endearment I whispered to her every night. "I could never hurt you." But the promise wasn't just for Sophia. It was for me too, and somehow that made it even more terrifying. Because Luca Romano was a man who kept his promises no matter the cost. We talked, not in the gymnasium, surrounded by volunteers and families and the press. Luca made a phone call, a quiet conversation in Italian that I couldn't quite follow. Within minutes, a man appeared, Antonio, who nodded respectfully and began handling the situation. Excuses were made to the director, something about a family emergency. The press was redirected to the councilwoman. And somehow, we found ourselves in the back office of the shelter, the door closed, the sound of the dinner muffled beyond the thin walls. Sophia sat on my lap, her arms wrapped around my neck, her eyes wide as she watched this stranger who looked so much like her. Lucas sat across from us in a folding chair that seemed too small for his frame. The space between us felt like an ocean. "How long have you known?" he asked, his voice carefully controlled. "Since the moment I found out I was pregnant," I replied. His jaw tightened. "And you didn't tell me." "I left you a note," I said, my voice defensive. "You were in the hospital. There was blood everywhere. Vincent was dead. Your men were hunting traitors. I thought you were going to die. I thought if I stayed, we both would." "That note," he said, his voice hollow. "The one that said goodbye. That said you couldn't do this anymore. You never mentioned being pregnant." "Because I didn't know how," I whispered. "How do you tell someone that you're carrying their child when that child will be born into a world of violence? When that child will be a target from the moment they take their first breath?" Luca was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on Sophia. She had relaxed slightly, her curiosity overcoming her fear. She was studying his face with the intensity of a child trying to solve a puzzle. "What's her name?" he asked finally. "Sophia," I said. "Sophia Romano," he repeated, tasting the words. "His daughter's name." "My daughter's name is Sophia Isabella Romano," I corrected, my voice firm. "My last name is on her birth certificate." His eyes snapped to mine, sharp and dangerous. "You gave her your name." "Not mine." "She doesn't know you exist," I said. "She doesn't know anything about your world, about what you do, about who you are. I've kept her safe." "Safe," he repeated, and there was something cold in his voice. "Hidden, you mean. Alone. Cut off from her father, from her family, from her heritage." "I did what I had to do," I said, my arms tightening around Sophia. She was starting to squirm, bored with the adult conversation. "I gave her a chance at a normal life." "Normal," Luca laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Working at a shelter, living in a third-floor walk-up, struggling to put food on the table. That's your definition of normal." "It's safe," I shot back. "It's quiet. It's everything your world is not." "And what happens when she gets older?" he asked, leaning forward. "When she starts asking questions about her father. When she wants to know why she has my eyes and my stubborn chin. When she realizes that other children have fathers who come to their school plays and teach them to ride bikes. You're going to lie to her forever." "I don't know," I admitted, my voice breaking slightly. I hadn't thought that far ahead. I had been so focused on keeping her alive, on keeping her away from the violence that surrounded him, that I hadn't considered what would happen as she grew up. "Mama," Sophia said suddenly, twisting in my lap to look at the man across from us. "Is that my daddy?" The question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. I looked at Luca, and I saw the exact moment his heart broke and mended itself all at once. He looked at Sophia with such raw tenderness that it took my breath away. "Yes, Bambina," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm your daddy." Sophia considered this for a moment, then reached out one small hand toward him. "Daddy hurt," she said, pointing to the scar over his eyebrow. "A little," he admitted, leaning forward so she could touch the thin line of silver. "But it's all better now." She nodded solemnly, then surprised us both by wriggling out of my arms and walking the few steps to his chair. She looked up at him expectantly, her arms raised in the universal gesture of a child who wanted to be held. Luca looked at me, a question in his eyes. I wanted to say no. I wanted to snatch her back, to run, to disappear again into the safety of anonymity. But I saw the hope in his face, the desperate love of a father meeting his daughter for the first time, and I couldn't bring myself to destroy that. I nodded once, a tiny movement that changed everything. He lifted Sophia carefully, as if she were made of glass, and settled her on his lap. She immediately reached for his face, her small fingers tracing his features with the fearless curiosity of a toddler. "You have my eyes," she announced seriously, as if this was a great discovery. "I do," he agreed, his voice soft. "And you have my stubborn chin." Sophia giggled, a sound of pure joy that filled the small room. For a moment, just a moment, we looked like a family. And that's when I knew we were all in terrible danger. The moment couldn't last, and it didn't. Sophia's initial fascination with her newfound father gave way to restlessness, and she began to fuss, tired and overwhelmed by the strangeness of the day. I took her back, settling her against my shoulder where she could hide her face from the intensity of Luca's gaze. "We need to leave," I said quietly. "She needs dinner and a bath and her normal routine. This is too much for her." Luca nodded, but his eyes never left Sophia's small form. "I understand. But this isn't over, Isabella. I've lost 3 years with her. I won't lose any more." "What are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. I was terrified of the answer, but I had to hear it. "I'm saying that I want to be her father. Really be her father. I want to know her favorite foods and her favorite stories. I want to teach her to speak Italian and take her to see the ocean. I want to be there when she's sick and when she's happy and when she has nightmares." My heart was pounding. "And me?" I whispered. "What about me?" His gaze finally shifted from Sophia to me, and what I saw there made my breath catch. Love. Still, after all these years, after everything that had happened, there was love in his eyes when he looked at me. "You ran from me once," he said softly. "I won't let you do it again." "That's not your choice to make," I said, but my voice lacked conviction. We both knew that everything had changed the moment Sophia reached for him, the moment she accepted him as her father. "Isn't it?" he asked, standing slowly. His presence filled the small room, commanding and dangerous. "You think you can disappear again. You think you can take my daughter and vanish into the shadows. But you're wrong, Isabella. I found you once. I'll find you again. And next time, I won't let you go." The threat was delivered quietly, almost gently, but it was a threat nonetheless. And the terrible thing was, part of me didn't want to run anymore. Part of me was tired of being afraid, tired of being alone, tired of pretending that I didn't still love the man who had fathered my child. But the rational part of me, the part that had kept Sophia safe for 3 years, knew that loving Luca Romano was dangerous. It had always been dangerous, and it always would be. "We'll see," I said finally, standing as well and adjusting Sophia's weight against my hip. "We'll see." But he was right, and we both knew it. The game had changed. I was no longer just Isabella, the anonymous shelter volunteer. I was Isabella Romano, the mother of his child, the woman who had his heart and his future in her hands. And Luca Romano was not a man who let go of what belonged to him. As we left the shelter that night, Sophia's small hand clutched in mine and Luca's presence a dark shadow behind us, I knew that our quiet life was over. Whatever came next would be complicated and dangerous, and probably terrifying. But for the first time in 3 years, I wouldn't be facing it alone. And maybe, just maybe, that was worth the risk. The apartment I shared with Sophia was small and cold and utterly inadequate for entertaining a man like Luca Romano, but it was ours. It was the first place I had ever lived that felt like home, with its drafty windows and creaking floors and the neighbors who minded their own business. As we climbed the 3 flights of stairs, Sophia babbling sleepily about the man with eyes like hers, I felt a sense of impending loss. This life, this simple, safe life, was about to be swept away. Luca said nothing as we entered the apartment, but I saw him taking inventory. The second-hand furniture, the small kitchen with its ancient appliances, the Christmas tree I had bought for $5 from a lot 2 blocks away. His expression was unreadable, but I knew he was cataloging every sign of our poverty, every indication that his daughter had been living far beneath the station he would have provided for her. Sophia went straight to her toy box, pulling out blocks and stuffed animals to show her father. "Look, Daddy," she said, holding up a worn teddy bear. "This is Mr. Bruno. He keeps the monsters away." Luca knelt down to examine the bear with appropriate seriousness. "He's very brave," he agreed. "Does he do a good job protecting you?" Sophia nodded emphatically. Mama says monsters can't come here because Mr. Bruno watches the door. I watched this exchange with a growing sense of unreality. 3 years ago, Luca had been a man who solved problems with violence, who lived in a world where children were liabilities and love was weakness. Now he was sitting on my worn carpet, discussing teddy bears with our daughter as if it were the most natural thing in the world. "Are you hungry?" I asked Sophia, desperate to restore some sense of normal routine. "I can make mac and cheese. The kind from the box," I added, somewhat defiantly, looking at Luca. I knew he was accustomed to gourmet meals prepared by professional chefs, but this was our reality. He said nothing, just continued playing with Sophia while I moved around the small kitchen. But I felt his presence like a weight in the air, heavy and warm and infinitely complicated. As Sophia ate her dinner, she chattered about her day, about the people at the shelter, about the Christmas tree and the snow. She included Luca in her monologue as if he had always been there, asking him questions about his favorite color and whether he liked snow and if he had ever seen a real live reindeer. He answered each question seriously, as if her opinions mattered more than anything else in the world. And maybe, I realized, they did. After dinner, I ran Sophia a bath, going through the familiar routine of washing her hair and letting her play with the floating toys I had bought at the dollar store. She was getting sleepy, her eyelids heavy as I dried her off and helped her into her pajamas. When we emerged from the bathroom, Luca was sitting on the couch, looking oddly domestic in the small space. Sophia ran to him immediately, crawling up onto his lap with the easy affection of a child who had never learned to fear strange men. "Story," she demanded, pointing to the bookshelf where I kept her collection of library books and second-hand picture books. "I can read to you," I offered, but Sophia shook her head. "Daddy read," she said firmly. She had decided, apparently, that having a father meant having someone new to read bedtime stories. Luca looked at me questioningly, and I nodded, selecting a book from the shelf. It was an old copy of Goodnight Moon, worn from countless readings. He took the book carefully, as if it were made of precious metal rather than cardboard and paper. His voice, when he began to read, was soft and gentle, nothing like the commanding tone he used with his men or the dangerous whisper he used with his enemies. Sophia listened with rapt attention, her small hand resting on his chest, her head heavy against his shoulder. When the story was finished, she was nearly asleep. "Daddy, stay," she mumbled, her words slurred with exhaustion. Daddy read more stories tomorrow. I saw something break in Luca's expression, a wall crumbling that had been carefully constructed over years of violence and betrayal. He looked at me over Sophia's head, and in his eyes I saw a vulnerability I had never seen before. "Of course, Bambina," he whispered, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Daddy will stay." The promise hung between us as I tucked Sophia into her small bed, her breathing already deep and even with sleep. When I returned to the living room, Luca was standing by the window, looking out at the street below. His shoulders were tense, his hands clasped behind his back. "That was a promise you can't keep," I said quietly. "She's going to expect you to be here tomorrow. And the day after that. And the day after that." "I know," he said without turning around. "So what are you going to do about it?" I asked. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he turned to face me, and the look in his eyes made my heart skip. "I'm going to be here," he said simply. "Tomorrow, and the day after that, and the day after that. I'm going to be the father she deserves, and the man you fell in love with before everything went wrong." "That man doesn't exist anymore," I whispered. "Too much has happened. Too much blood has been spilled." Luca walked toward me slowly, his movements careful and deliberate. When he was close enough to touch, he stopped, his hands hanging at his sides. "Maybe he doesn't," he said. "Maybe too much has changed for us to go back to what we were. But maybe we can find something new, something better, something worth the risk." I wanted to believe him. God help me, I wanted to believe him so badly it physically hurt. But I had spent 3 years learning to live without him. 3 years building a life that was safe and small and mine. The idea of giving that up, of trusting him again, of putting Sophia at risk, was terrifying. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "I don't know if I can be the person you need me to be." "I don't need you to be anyone but who you are," he said, his hand finally lifting to touch my face with infinite gentleness. "I need you to be Sophia's mother and the woman who told me the truth even when it was dangerous." I need you to be Isabella, not some version of yourself that you think I want. His thumb traced the line of my cheekbone, and I found myself leaning into the touch despite every instinct that told me to run. This is crazy, I whispered. This is dangerous and complicated and probably impossible. Probably, he agreed, his forehead coming to rest against mine. But it's also real. And it's ours. And maybe that's enough to start with. I closed my eyes, letting myself have this moment, this feeling of being held and wanted and understood. Tomorrow I would have to think about the practicalities, about the dangers, about what it would mean for Sophia to have Luca Romano as her father. But tonight, for just tonight, I let myself remember what it felt like to not be alone. When I woke the next morning, I thought for a moment that it had all been a dream. The sun was streaming through the thin curtains, and Sophia was still asleep in her bed, her dark hair spread across the pillow like a halo. But then I smelled coffee, real coffee, not the instant kind I bought at the grocery store, and I knew Luca was still here. He was in the kitchen, somehow making breakfast on my ancient stove. He had managed to find ingredients I didn't even know I had, transforming them into something that smelled like hope and tasted like possibilities. "Morning," he said when he saw me, and there was something almost shy in his expression, as if he wasn't sure of his welcome in the harsh light of day. "You stayed," I said unnecessarily. "I promised Sophia I would," he replied. "And I promised you something new. I figured that should start with breakfast." Sophia chose that moment to wake up, her sleepy voice calling for me from her bedroom. But when she appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes and clutching Mr. Bruno, the first thing she saw was Lucas standing at the stove, and her face lit up like Christmas morning. "Daddy made pancakes," she announced with delight, as if this was the most wonderful thing that had ever happened to her. "Indeed I did," Lucas said solemnly. "With chocolate chips. Because that's what princesses eat for breakfast." Sophia giggled and climbed onto her booster seat at the small table, immediately reaching for the plate Lucas set in front of her. The domesticity of the scene was so normal, so perfectly ordinary, that it took my breath away. This was what I had dreamed of during those long nights when I held my pregnant belly and wondered what kind of life my child would have. This was the fantasy I had given up when I chose safety over love, isolation over family. And now, impossibly, it was real. But reality, as I had learned, had a way of intruding on even the most perfect moments. As we were finishing breakfast, as Sophia was chattering about going to the park and building snowmen, Luca's phone rang. The sound cut through the warm domesticity like a blade, sharp and urgent and utterly unwelcome. He looked at the caller ID, and I saw his expression change, the gentle father disappearing and the dangerous man taking his place. "I have to take this," he said, stepping into the living room. I could hear him speaking in rapid Italian, his voice low and tense. Whatever was happening, it wasn't good. When he returned to the kitchen, his face was grim. "I have to go," he said, and I heard an apology in his voice. "Business. Something I can't ignore." Sophia looked up from her pancakes, her face falling. "But Daddy just got here," she protested. "I know, Bambina," he said, kneeling beside her chair. "But I'll come back. I promise. That's what daddies do. They always come back to their little girls." It was a promise he shouldn't have made, and we both knew it. In his world, promises were luxuries that couldn't always be kept. But Sophia believed him with the absolute faith of a child who had never been disappointed by the adults in her life. "Okay," she said seriously, "but bring presents next time." Luca laughed, the sound genuine despite the tension radiating from his body. "Of course. What kind of presents do you like?" "Ponies," Sophia said immediately. "And ice cream. And books with pictures." "I'll see what I can do," he promised, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. After he left, the apartment felt empty in a way it never had before. Sophia asked about him constantly throughout the day, wondering when he would come back, what he was doing, whether he missed her. I found myself wondering the same things and hating myself for it. That night, as I was putting Sophia to bed, she asked the question I had been dreading. "Mama, is Daddy going to live with us now?" "I don't know, baby," I said honestly. "It's complicated." She considered this with the seriousness of a 2-year-old trying to understand adult concepts. "But he's my daddy," she said finally. "Daddies are supposed to live with their little girls. That's how families work." Out of the mouths of babes. She was right, of course. That was how families were supposed to work. But we weren't a normal family, and Luca wasn't a normal father. Our situation was complicated by violence and danger and 3 years of separation. Still, as I watched Sophia drift off to sleep, I found myself hoping that maybe, somehow, we could find a way to make it work. The hope lasted exactly 36 hours. I was at work at the shelter, Sophia safe in the nursery they provided for volunteers' children, when Carmen came running up to me, her face white with panic. "Isabella," she said, grabbing my arm. "There are men outside. Black cars. They're asking about you." My blood turned to ice. I knew immediately what this meant, though I had hoped it would never come. Luca's world had found us, just as I had always feared it would. "Where's Sophia?" I asked, already moving toward the nursery. "Safe," Carmen said. I told them to lock the door. "But Isabella, who are these people? What do they want?" I couldn't explain. There wasn't time. I grabbed Sophia from the nursery, ignoring her protests that she wasn't finished playing, and headed for the back exit. But it was too late. 2 men in expensive suits were waiting by my car, their eyes hidden behind dark glasses despite the overcast day. They weren't doing anything threatening, just standing there, but their presence was message enough. I turned to go back inside, but there were 2 more men by the front door. I was surrounded, trapped as efficiently as a mouse in a maze. One of the men approached me, his movements careful and non-threatening. "Miss Romano," he said politely. "Mr. Romano requests your company for lunch." "It's not a request," I said, clutching Sophia tighter. She was starting to get scared, sensing my fear even though she didn't understand what was happening. "No, ma'am," the man agreed. "It's not. But he's not asking you to come alone. He's asking you to bring your daughter. He wants to see her again." The fact that they knew about Sophia, that they had been watching us enough to know about her, made me feel sick. But what choice did I have? These men weren't going away, and making a scene would only put Sophia in more danger. "I'll drive myself," I said. The man shook his head. "Mr. Romano was very specific. He wants to ensure your safety. We'll provide transportation." The black sedan was exactly the kind of car I had hoped never to see again. Bulletproof glass, tinted windows, the discreet luxury that screamed money and power and danger. Sophia was fascinated by the smooth ride and the buttons that controlled the windows and air conditioning. But all I could think about was the fact that I had voluntarily walked back into the world I had spent 3 years trying to escape. The restaurant was the kind of place I had once taken for granted, all white tablecloths and discreet service and prices that could feed a family of 4 for a week. Luca was waiting at a corner table, his back to the wall, his eyes scanning the room even as he smiled at Sophia's excited chatter. He looked different in this environment, more polished, more dangerous. This was Luca Romano the businessman, not Luca the father reading bedtime stories on my worn couch. "Daddy," Sophia called out, wriggling free from my arms to run to him. "You came back." "I did," he said, lifting her onto his lap. "I promised I would." The men who had brought us melted away, taking positions at other tables where they could watch the room. I sat across from Luca, my hands shaking slightly as I reached for my water glass. "This was a mistake," I said quietly. "Bringing her here, letting her see this world. She's part of this world whether you acknowledge it or not," he replied, helping Sophia color on the children's menu the waitress had brought. "She's my daughter. This is her heritage. Her heritage is violence and blood and fear," I hissed, keeping my voice low so Sophia wouldn't hear. "Her heritage is men in suits who aren't really asking when they make requests. Her heritage is wondering if her father is going to come home alive every night." Luca's jaw tightened. "That's one way to look at it," he said. "Another way is that her heritage is family and loyalty and the resources to protect the people she loves. Another way is that she'll never want for anything, never be afraid because she'll always be safe." "Safe," I laughed bitterly. "Like we were safe when your men surrounded the shelter. Like we're safe sitting here in a restaurant that probably has more security than the White House. That safety is an illusion, Isabella. You've been living it for 3 years, and where did it get you? Working for minimum wage, struggling to pay rent, raising my daughter in poverty because you're too proud to accept help. At least my kind of safety comes with resources." His words stung because they were partially true. I had struggled, more than I cared to admit. There had been nights when I went to bed hungry so Sophia could have enough to eat. Times when I chose between paying for heat or buying her new clothes when she outgrew the old ones. But that struggle had been honest, clean. It hadn't come with the price of blood. Sophia, oblivious to the tension between her parents, was happily coloring and chattering about her morning at the shelter. She liked the crayons here better than the broken ones we had at home, she announced. They were pointier and made better lines. I'll get you new crayons, Luca promised immediately. A whole box of the pointy kind. And maybe some markers too. My chest tightened at how easily he made promises, how quickly he tried to solve problems with money and gifts. That was his world, where everything could be bought and every problem had a price. I don't want your money, I said firmly. And I don't want Sophia growing up thinking that love can be purchased. I'm not trying to buy her love, he said, his voice equally firm. I'm trying to provide for her the way a father should. The way I should have been doing for the past 3 years if you hadn't run away. We can't keep having this same argument, I said tiredly. What's done is done. The question is what happens now. Luca leaned back in his chair, studying me with those penetrating blue eyes that Sophia had inherited. What happens now is that we figure out how to be a family. What happens now is that you stop running and I stop chasing and we start building something together. And if I say no, I asked. If I say this isn't the life I want for Sophia, then you'll be saying no to her father, he replied quietly. You'll be telling her that she can't have a daddy because you're afraid. Is that really what you want to teach her? That love isn't worth the risk. The question hung between us as Sophia continued coloring, humming tunelessly under her breath. She was so innocent, so blissfully unaware of the forces pulling at her from both sides. In her world, she had a mama who loved her and a daddy who had just appeared like magic, bearing gifts and promises. In her world, families were simple things that happened when people loved each other. If only it were that easy. By the time we finished lunch, Sophia was exhausted from the excitement and the rich food she wasn't used to. She fell asleep in the car on the way back to our apartment, her head heavy against my shoulder, her small hand clutching the new stuffed elephant Luca had somehow procured between the appetizer and the main course. As we pulled up to my building, I realized that I still hadn't given him an answer. I still hadn't decided what I was going to do about his place in our lives. But Luca, it seemed, had made the decision for me. The men in the front seat made no move to get out of the car. Instead, they waited as Luca carried the sleeping Sophia up the 3 flights of stairs, as he helped me unlock the door and settle her in her bed without waking her. When we were back in the living room, he sat on my second-hand couch as if he belonged there, as if this was just another ordinary day in an ordinary life. You're not leaving, I observed. No, he agreed. I'm not. This is my home now, too. You can't just move in, I protested. This is my apartment. My life. Sophia's life. And Sophia is my daughter, he replied calmly. Which makes this my life, too. I'm not going to be a part-time father, Isabella. I'm not going to see her on weekends and holidays like some divorced dad. I'm going to be here every day. I'm going to read her bedtime stories and teach her to tie her shoes and scare away the monsters under her bed. And you? I asked, my heart pounding. What about me? His gaze softened, and he reached for my hand, his fingers warm and strong and familiar. You're the woman I love, he said simply. You're the mother of my child and the only person who's ever made me want to be better than I am. You can fight me on this, or you can accept that we're meant to be together. But either way, I'm not going anywhere. The declaration should have been romantic. It should have swept me off my feet and made me believe in fairy tales again. But all I could think about was the danger, the inevitable moment when his world would collide with ours and shatter the fragile peace we had built. What about your business? I asked. What about the people who want to hurt you? What about the next Vincent who decides you need to be eliminated? I've taken steps, he said, his voice growing harder. Security measures. My organization is stronger now, more stable. And anyone who threatens you or Sophia will discover that my methods of protecting my family are very different from my methods of conducting business. The implied threat in his words should have frightened me. Instead, I found it oddly comforting. Whatever else Luca Romano was, he was a man who protected what belonged to him. And whether I liked it or not, Sophia and I belonged to him now. That night, after Sophia was asleep and Luca was making phone calls in the kitchen, conducting business in the low, rapid Italian that had once lulled me to sleep, I stood at my bedroom window looking out at the street below. There was a car parked across from our building that hadn't been there that morning. Subtle, unmarked, but unmistakably a guard post. Luca's men, watching over us while we slept. For 3 years, I had fallen asleep to the sound of sirens and car horns and the occasional shout from the street. Tonight, I fell asleep to the sound of Luca's voice in the next room, speaking in the language of his childhood, conducting the business that would always be part of our lives. It should have kept me awake with anxiety. Instead, it was the first time in 3 years that I felt truly safe. The morning brought reality crashing back in the form of Sophia's questions. She woke up expecting her daddy to be there, and when she found him drinking coffee in our kitchen, still wearing yesterday's clothes, she accepted it with the easy adaptability of a child. But she had questions. Lots of them. Did daddy live with us now? Where were his clothes? Why didn't he have a toothbrush? Could she help him pick out a toothbrush the next time we went to the store? Luca answered each question with patience and humor, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. He was already making plans, already figuring out the logistics of inserting himself permanently into our lives. By noon, his men had arrived with suitcases, expensive luggage that looked out of place in our small apartment. By evening, our bathroom counter was crowded with toiletries I couldn't pronounce, and our closet held suits that cost more than I made in 6 months. Sophia was delighted by these changes. She helped him arrange his clothes, chattering constantly about how this was what daddies did. They brought their stuff to live with their families. For her, it was simple and wonderful and exactly what she had been hoping for without really understanding what she was hoping for. For me, it was terrifying, not just because of the danger, though that was real and constant, but because of how right it felt, how easily Luca fit into our routine, how natural it seemed to wake up with him beside me and fall asleep to the sound of his breathing. 3 years of careful independence was crumbling in the face of something I had forgotten I wanted. A partner, a family, a life that was bigger than just survival. But with Luca came complications I wasn't prepared for. His phone rang constantly, urgent conversations about shipments and territories, and people whose names I recognized from newspaper articles. Men came to the apartment for meetings, respectful and well-dressed, and undeniably dangerous. They treated Sophia with careful politeness and me with the deference due to the boss's woman. But their presence was a constant reminder that our small apartment was now the nerve center of operations I preferred not to think about. The breaking point came a week later. I was coming home from the grocery store, Sophia's hand in mine, when I noticed the black sedan following us. Not Luca's men, I realized with growing panic. These were different cars, different faces behind the wheel. We were being watched by people who weren't supposed to be watching us. I didn't go home. Instead, I ducked into a coffee shop 3 blocks away and called Luca with shaking hands. "We have a problem," I said when he answered. "There are people following us. People who aren't ours." The silence on the other end of the line was brief, but telling. "Where are you?" he asked, his voice immediately shifting to the tone he used for emergencies. I told him, and he was there in 5 minutes, appearing in the coffee shop with 2 of his men and an expression that made other customers suddenly remember they had somewhere else to be. He didn't ask questions, didn't waste time with explanations. He simply gathered Sophia and me and escorted us to his car, his body a shield between us and any potential threat. Sophia, sensing the tension, was quiet during the ride, her thumb in her mouth and her wide eyes taking in the serious faces of the adults around her. It wasn't until we were safely back in our apartment, the door locked and his men positioned outside, that Luca allowed his composure to crack. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," I said, pacing the small living room while Sophia played quietly with her toys, pretending not to notice that all the adults were upset. "This is why I ran. This is why I stayed hidden. Because the moment you're in our lives, we become targets." "I know," he said quietly, "and I'm handling it." "You're handling it," I repeated incredulously. "Luca, there were men following my daughter. Our daughter. Following her because she's connected to you. How exactly do you handle that?" "By making sure it never happens again," he said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "By sending a message that makes it clear that touching my family is not an option." "More violence," I said, my voice breaking. "More blood. More fear. More running. Is this what you want Sophia to grow up with?" The question hung between us like a challenge. In the corner, Sophia was building a tower with her blocks, humming to herself, oblivious to the fact that her parents were deciding her future. Luca looked at her, and something in his expression shifted. When he spoke again, his voice was softer, more uncertain than I had ever heard it. What do you want me to do, Isabella? He asked. Do you want me to walk away? Do you want me to pretend I never found you, never learned I had a daughter? Do you want me to go back to being dead to you? The pain in his voice was real and raw and devastating. Because I couldn't do it, he continued. Even if you asked me to, even if you begged me to, I couldn't walk away from her. She's mine. She's the best thing I've ever done, and I won't lose her again. I don't want you to leave, I admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep in my chest. That's the problem. I don't want you to leave, but I can't live like this. I can't raise her in a world where men in cars follow us home. I can't teach her to be afraid of every shadow, every stranger. I can't be the woman who waits by the window, wondering if today is the day someone decides you're a threat that needs to be eliminated. Then what? He asked, moving closer. What's the solution? Because I love you, both of you, and I'm not going to let anyone hurt you. But I also can't change what I am, who I am. This is my world, and like it or not, you're part of it now. I want out, I said suddenly, the words surprising even me. I want all of us out. I want you to leave. Leave the business, leave the city, leave everything behind. We could start over somewhere else. Somewhere safe. Somewhere Sophia could grow up normal. Lucas stared at me as if I had suggested we fly to the moon. Leave, he repeated. Isabella, you don't understand. I can't just leave. There are obligations, responsibilities. People who depend on me. People who would see leaving as weakness, as an opportunity. I don't care about those people, I said fiercely. I care about Sophia. I care about our family. Isn't that more important than business? Isn't that worth more than money and power and whatever else you get from that life? The argument was interrupted by Sophia herself, who had finished her tower and was now standing beside us, looking up with concern at the two adults who were clearly upset about something. Mama crying, she observed, reaching out to touch my face where tears I hadn't realized I was shedding had left tracks. Daddy mad. We're not mad at you, baby, I said quickly, kneeling down to her level. Mommy and Daddy are just talking about grown-up things. Are you going away again? She asked Luca, her voice small and worried. The question hit him like a physical blow. No, Bambina, he said, kneeling beside me and taking her small hands in his larger ones. I'm not going anywhere. Mommy and I are just trying to figure out the best way to take care of you. Good, she said seriously. Because I like having a daddy. And I like when you read stories. And I like when you make pancakes. I want you to stay forever and ever. Over her head, Luca and I looked at each other, and I saw my own conflict reflected in his eyes. How do you choose between love and safety? How do you weigh the happiness of a child against the very real dangers that came with the life he had built? Forever and ever is a long time, he said gently to Sophia. But I'll try my best to stay as long as I can. It wasn't a promise. Not really. But it was more than he had given me before, and maybe it was enough to build on. That night, after Sophia was asleep and the apartment was quiet except for the distant sounds of the city, Luca and I sat at my small kitchen table and tried to figure out our future. He had made phone calls, quiet conversations that resulted in increased security and vague assurances that the people who had been following us would not be a problem again. But we both knew this was temporary. In his world, there would always be another threat, another enemy, another reason to look over our shoulders. I can't leave everything, he said finally. Not completely, but I can step back. I can delegate more, be less visible. I can make it so that the day-to-day operations don't require my constant presence. It's not perfect, but it's something. And the danger, I asked. The people who see you as a target. That will always exist, he admitted. But it exists for you too, just by being connected to me. The difference is whether you face it alone or whether we face it together. I thought about this, about the choice between the illusion of safety and the reality of protection. For 3 years, I had believed I was keeping Sophia safe by hiding. But the truth was, we had been vulnerable all along. Isolated, unprotected, one piece of bad luck away from discovery. At least with Luca, we had resources. We had people watching over us, systems in place to keep us safe. At least with Luca, we weren't alone. Okay, I said finally. We try it your way. But I have conditions. Anything, he said immediately. Sophia comes first, I said. Always. Any decision, any risk, any choice, she's the priority. She's the priority, he agreed without hesitation. And if it gets too dangerous, if the threats become too real, we leave. All of us. We take Sophia, and we disappear, and you don't look back. Luca was quiet for a long moment, and I knew this was the hardest thing I could ask of him. To abandon the life he had built, the legacy he had inherited, the responsibilities he carried. But finally, he nodded. If it comes to that, he said, if staying means putting her in danger, then we go. The agreement hung between us, fragile as spun glass, but real nonetheless. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't permanent, but it was a start. It was a way to try to build a life together without sacrificing the safety of our daughter. As we sat there in the quiet kitchen, his hand covering mine on the worn table, I thought about the woman I had been 3 years ago. She had been brave enough to love him then, despite the dangers. Maybe I could find that courage again. Maybe we could make this work. Maybe love really was worth the risk. The next few months were a careful balancing act, a delicate negotiation between the life I wanted and the life Luca could provide. He kept his promises, stepping back from the day-to-day operations of his business, spending more time at home with Sophia and me. The threats that had seemed so immediate began to fade into the background, managed by his men and his reputation and the careful diplomatic work that kept his enemies at bay. Sophia thrived in this new reality. She had her father now, someone who read her bedtime stories and taught her Italian lullabies and brought her thoughtful presents that weren't expensive but were chosen with care. She had a sense of security she had never known, the confidence that comes from being loved and protected by people who would do anything to keep her safe. And slowly, carefully, I began to let myself hope that maybe we really could make this work. Maybe we really could be a family, despite everything that stood against us. Maybe love really was enough to overcome the complications and dangers of the life we were choosing. That night, we were back at the penthouse, but it wasn't a glass box anymore. It was home. There were toys on the floor. There were my books on the shelf. There was a fire roaring in the huge marble fireplace. Sophia was asleep. The snow was falling again, a silent, beautiful blanket. Luca was sitting on the thick rug in front of the fire, staring into the flames. I came over with 2 glasses of wine and sat down. I didn't sit next to him. I curled up in his lap, my back to his chest, leaning my head against his shoulder. He wrapped his arms around me, his chin resting on the top of my head. We just sat there watching the fire. It's quiet, I whispered. It's quiet, he agreed. I took his right hand, the one he had hurt in the fight. The bandage was gone. The knuckles were raw, scabbed. I lifted his hand and kissed each knuckle. Don't, he whispered. They're not, they're yours, I said. I turned in his lap to face him. I traced the faint silver scar over his eyebrow. I touched the healing cut on his lip. I traced the old puckered scar on his forearm. I was accepting him. All of him, the past, the present. I love you, I whispered. It was the first time I had said it in 3 years. He closed his eyes, a pained, beautiful expression on his face. He leaned his forehead against mine. You both saved me, he whispered, his voice thick with an emotion I couldn't name. I was a ghost. I was just my father's son. Just a name, an inheritance of blood. And you, and Sophia, you gave me a life. He kissed me. It was not a kiss of passion or of desperation. It was a kiss of profound, unbelievable gratitude. It was a kiss of peace. We just held each other by the fire, the city glittering at our backs. Mommy, Daddy. We turned. Sophia was standing in the archway, dragging her stuffed bear. Hey, Bambina, Lucas said, holding out his arm. Bad dream. She shook her head. She just walked over to us. She looked at me, curled in Lucas' lap. She looked at him, his arms around me. A slow smile spread across her face. She reached out, her small hands grabbing my hand and his hand. She pulled them together, clasping them in her own. She giggled. Can we be a family now? She asked. I looked at Luca. His eyes were shining, the fire light dancing in them. I smiled, my tears falling. Yes, Sophia, he said, his voice breaking. We can. He pulled us both closer, his 2 girls, his family, and the 3 of us sat there together in the warm glow of the fire while the snow fell and the world outside was finally beautifully silent. 6 months later, the penthouse had transformed into something I never thought possible. It was a home, real and lived in and full of laughter. Sophia's toys were scattered across the marble floors. Her drawings covered the refrigerator, and her small shoes sat next to Luca's expensive ones by the door. We had found our rhythm, the 3 of us, in ways that surprised me every day. Luca kept his promise about stepping back from the family business. The transition wasn't easy, and there were still late-night phone calls, still meetings with men in expensive suits who spoke in code. But he was home for breakfast every morning, reading Sophia bedtime stories every night, and teaching her Italian words that made her giggle. He was learning to be a father, and Sophia was learning that daddies could be gentle giants who built pillow forts and made pancakes shaped like hearts. I was learning something too. I was learning that love and safety didn't have to be mutually exclusive, that sometimes the most dangerous thing was also the most protective. Luca's world was still violent, still unpredictable, but his love for us was a fortress stronger than any penthouse security system. The morning everything changed again started like any other. Sophia was at her small table, coloring with the expensive crayons Luca had bought her, speaking a mixture of English and Italian that made both of us smile. Luca was at the kitchen island, reading something on his phone while drinking his coffee. I was making breakfast, humming softly, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. Then Luca's phone rang. I knew immediately that something was wrong from the way his whole body went rigid. From the way he answered with his full name instead of the casual greeting he usually gave Antonio. From the way the color drained from his face as he listened. "Isabella," he said when he hung up, his voice carefully controlled. "We need to talk." Sophia looked up from her coloring, sensing the change in atmosphere with the intuition children have for adult distress. "Is everything okay, Daddy?" she asked in her serious voice. "Everything's fine, Bambina," Lucas said, but I could hear the lie in his voice. "Mommy and I just need to have a grown-up conversation. Why don't you go play with your dollhouse?" She nodded and skipped away, and I felt my chest tighten with familiar fear. "What is it?" I asked, though I already knew I didn't want to hear the answer. "The Benedetto family," he said quietly. "They've made contact. They want a meeting." I had heard that name whispered in the conversations Luca thought I couldn't hear. The Benedettos were old enemies, a family that had been at war with the Romanos for decades. They were the kind of people who held grudges across generations, who believed in blood debts that could never be paid. "What do they want?" I asked, though I already knew. "They know about Sophia," he said. "Someone leaked information about her existence. About us. They're offering a deal." "What kind of deal?" I whispered. "The kind where they leave us alone in exchange for territorial concessions," he said. "The kind where I give them half my legitimate businesses and they pretend she doesn't exist. And if you refuse, then they make their own statement about what happens to people who cross the Benedetto family." The familiar terror was rising in my chest, the same panic that had driven me to run 3 years ago. But this time, I wasn't alone with it. This time, I had Luca standing beside me, his jaw set with determination, his hands clenched into fists. "We're not running," he said firmly. "And we're not negotiating. There has to be another way." "What are you thinking?" I asked, though part of me was afraid to hear the answer. "I'm thinking that the Benedettos made one crucial mistake," he said, and there was something cold and dangerous in his voice. "They threaten my family, and that's the one thing I will never tolerate." Over the next few days, our home transformed once again. But this time, instead of becoming more domestic, it became more fortified. There were additional security cameras, more men stationed at entrances, and a tension in the air that Sophia couldn't help but notice. She started having nightmares again, waking up crying for her daddy and clinging to both of us like she was afraid we might disappear. It broke my heart to see her frightened, to watch the carefree little girl she had become retreat back into the scared child she had been when we lived in hiding. Luca was consumed with planning, with phone calls and meetings and strategies I didn't want to understand. But he still made time for Sophia, still read her stories, and answered her questions about why there were so many new people around the house. He told her they were friends who were helping to keep us safe, and she accepted this explanation with the trust children have in their parents. The breaking point came when Sophia asked me a question that stopped me cold. "Mama," she said one morning as I was braiding her hair, "are we going to have to run away again?" The question hit me like a physical blow. She was only 2, but she remembered. She remembered the fear, the uncertainty, the constant sense of being hunted. And now, despite all our efforts to give her stability, that fear was back. "No, baby," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "We're not going anywhere. This is our home." But she looked at me with those 2 knowing gray-green eyes that were so much like her father's. and I could see that she didn't quite believe me. How could she, when the adults around her were tense and worried and whispering in corners? That night, after Sophia was finally asleep, I found Luca on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. He looked older than his 34 years, weighted down by responsibilities he had never asked for but couldn't abandon. "We can't keep living like this," I said, joining him at the railing. "I know," he replied without turning around. "She's scared again," I continued. "She's having nightmares. She asked me if we were going to run away again." That made him turn, and I could see the pain in his face. The idea that his presence in our lives was causing Sophia distress was almost more than he could bear. "What do you want me to do, Isabella?" he asked, and there was desperation in his voice. "Do you want me to walk away? Do you want me to disappear so you can go back to hiding?" "I don't know," I admitted, and the honesty of it hurt. "I love you. I want us to be a family. But I can't watch her be afraid anymore. I can't put her through what I went through, wondering every day if today is the day something terrible happens." We stood there in silence, the weight of impossible choices hanging between us. Below us, the city moved on, oblivious to the drama playing out 50 floors above. Then Lucas spoke, his voice quiet but determined. "There is one option," he said. "One way to end this permanently." "What?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. "I give them what they really want," he said. "Not the businesses. Not the territory. Me." The words hit me like a slap. "No," I said immediately. "Whatever you're thinking, the answer is no." "Isabella, listen to me," he said, turning to face me fully. "The Benedettos don't really care about the territory or the money. What they want is revenge for old grievances. What they want is to humiliate the Romano family. If I offer myself up, if I surrender to them, they'll leave you and Sophia alone." "You're talking about suicide?" I said, my voice rising. "You're talking about walking into their hands knowing they'll kill you." "Maybe," he said, "but maybe not. Maybe there's a way to make a deal that keeps everyone alive. Maybe I can find a solution that doesn't involve Sophia growing up afraid." I was shaking my head before he finished speaking. "No, absolutely not. We'll find another way. We'll run if we have to. We'll disappear again. But I won't let you sacrifice yourself." He reached for me then, pulling me into his arms, and I could feel the tremor in his hands that told me he was just as scared as I was. "I love you," he whispered into my hair. "I love both of you more than my own life. If dying means you get to live safely, then it's not really a choice at all." But I was already making my own plans, my own desperate calculations. Because if Luca thought I was going to let him martyr himself for our safety, he didn't know me as well as he thought he did. The next morning, while Luca was in a meeting with Antonio and his other advisors, I made a phone call of my own. "I want to meet with the Benedettos," I told the man who answered, my voice steady despite the terror coursing through my veins. There was a long pause. "Who is this?" he asked. "This is Isabella Romano," I said, using Luca's name deliberately. "And I have a proposition for your boss." The meeting was arranged for that afternoon at a neutral location downtown. I told Carmen I was taking Sophia shopping, left her with the nanny Luca had insisted we hire, and drove myself to the coffee shop where I would either save my family or destroy it. Salvatore Benedetto was not what I expected. He was in his 60s, well-dressed and soft-spoken, with the kind of grandfatherly demeanor that made you forget he was one of the most dangerous men in the city. He sat across from me at a small table, sipping espresso and studying me with intelligent dark eyes. "Mrs. Romano," he said politely, "you're not what I expected either." "I'm not here to play games, Mr. Benedetto," I said, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "I'm here to make a deal." "I'm listening," he said. "You want revenge against the Romano family," I continued. "You want to settle old debts and prove that no one crosses the Benedettos without consequences." "That's accurate," he agreed. "But what you really want is to send a message," I said. "You want other families to know that you're not weak, that you haven't forgotten old grievances. Killing Luca would accomplish that, but it would also start a war you might not win." He raised an eyebrow, intrigued despite himself. "What are you proposing?" "A public humiliation instead of a private execution," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "Luca steps down from all leadership roles. He publicly acknowledges that the Romano family wronged the Benedettos. He pays financial restitution. In exchange, you leave our family alone." "And why would I agree to that when I could simply take everything?" he asked. "Because this way, you get your revenge without the blood," I said. This way, you look reasonable instead of vindictive. And this way, you don't have to explain to the other families why you murdered a man who was trying to go legitimate. Benedetto was quiet for a long moment, considering. Then he leaned forward, his expression serious. There would be conditions, he said. Name them, I replied. Luca Romano never returns to active leadership of any criminal organization, he said. He never interferes with Benedetto business. And you, Mrs. Romano, understand that this agreement extends only to your immediate family. If any other Romanos seek revenge for this humiliation, the deal is void. I understand, I said, though my heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. And one more thing, he added. The financial restitution will be substantial. Enough to hurt. Enough to remind him of the cost of crossing my family. How much, I asked. $50 million, he said. Payable within 6 months. The number hit me like a physical blow. It was more money than I could even comprehend, more than Luca might have access to even with all his legitimate businesses. That's impossible, I said. Then I suppose we have nothing to discuss, he replied, starting to stand. Wait, I said quickly. I'll need to discuss this with Luca. But if he agrees, if he can find the money, you'll honor the agreement. If he agrees to the terms and can pay the restitution within 6 months, then yes, Benedetto said. Your family will be left alone. But Mrs. Romano, if he fails to meet any part of this agreement, if he tries to negotiate or delay or find loopholes, then I will consider our arrangement void. And when that happens, the consequences will be severe. I understood the threat. I nodded once, stood on shaking legs, and walked out of the coffee shop before my courage could fail me entirely. When I got home, Luca was waiting for me in the living room, his face a mask of controlled fury. Where were you? He asked, his voice deadly quiet. I went to see Salvatore Benedetto, I said, deciding that honesty was the only way forward. The silence that followed was deafening. Luca's face went through several emotions in quick succession: shock, disbelief, terror, and finally, a cold anger that made me take a step back. You did what? He said, his voice barely above a whisper. I made a deal, I said, lifting my chin defiantly. A deal that keeps you alive and keeps our family together. Isabella, he said, and there was something broken in his voice. Do you have any idea what you've done? Do you understand the kind of people you just sat down with? I understand that they were willing to negotiate, I shot back. I understand that they want their revenge, but they don't necessarily want a war. And I understand that sometimes the people who love you have to be willing to fight for you, even when you're too noble to fight for yourself. He stared at me for a long moment, and I could see him processing the implications of what I had done. Then he sank into a chair, his head in his hands. Tell me everything, he said quietly. I told him about the meeting, about the terms, about the $50 million. I watched his face as I spoke, saw the way his expression grew more grim with each detail. When I finished, he was quiet for so long I thought he wasn't going to respond at all. $50 million, he finally said. Can you get it? I asked. Maybe, he said. If I liquidate everything. If I sell the legitimate businesses, cash in all the investments, call in all the debts owed to me. Maybe. But, I prompted, sensing there was more. But it would mean starting over completely, he said. It would mean having nothing left except each other. No safety net. No resources. No way to protect you if something goes wrong. I sat down beside him, taking his hands in mine. Luca, I said gently. We survived for 3 years on my shelter wages and your absence. We can survive anything as long as we're together. He looked at me then, really looked at me, and I saw something shift in his expression, something that looked like hope. You're sure about this? He asked. You're sure you want to tie your future to a man who's about to lose everything? I already tied my future to you, I said. The day I decided to trust you with Sophia. The day I decided to stop running. Everything else is just details. Over the next few months, I watched Luca systematically dismantle everything his father had built. It was painful to see, like watching someone tear down their own house brick by brick. But there was also something liberating about it, something clean. He sold the legitimate businesses to competitors, liquidated investments that had been growing for decades, and called in favors that had been years in the making. Sophia didn't understand why we were suddenly packing boxes and saying goodbye to the penthouse, but she accepted it with the resilience children have for change when they feel loved and secure. We moved to a smaller apartment in Brooklyn, not far from the shelter where Luca and I had found each other again. It wasn't luxurious, but it was ours. It was a place where Sophia could have friends over without anyone worrying about security cameras or armed guards. On the day Luca made the final payment to the Benedettos, he came home looking older, but somehow lighter. "It's done," he said simply, and I knew that our old life was officially over. That night, as we lay in our new bedroom in our new apartment, listening to Sophia breathing quietly in the room next to ours, Luca asked me a question that had been weighing on both of us. "Do you regret it?" he said. "Do you regret giving up the penthouse, the security, all the things money could buy?" I turned to face him in the darkness. "Do you know what I was most afraid of?" I asked. "All those years we were apart." "What?" he said. "I was afraid that you would forget us," I said. "I was afraid that Sophia would grow up without knowing her father, and that you would move on and find a life that didn't include the complications we represented." "I could never forget you," he said fiercely. "I know that now," I replied. "But back then, I was so scared that love wasn't enough. That when faced with a choice between us and everything else, you would choose everything else." He was quiet for a moment, processing this. "And now," he asked, "now I know that when it mattered, when the choice was between money and power and us, you chose us," I said. "You chose us over everything else. How could I regret that?" We settled into our new life with surprising ease. Luca found work consulting for businesses that needed help with security and logistics, using his skills in ways that didn't require violence or moral compromises. It wasn't the empire his father had dreamed of, but it was honest work that he could be proud of. I went back to school part-time, pursuing the degree I had abandoned when I ran away pregnant. It felt good to be learning again, to be building something positive for our future. Sophia started preschool and made friends whose parents didn't need to be background checked by security teams. She was flourishing in ways I hadn't expected, more confident and outgoing than she had ever been when we lived in hiding or in the fortress of the penthouse. One evening, about a year after we had made the deal with the Benedettos, Sophia asked me a question that made my heart skip. "Mama," she said as I was tucking her into bed, "are we normal now?" "What do you mean, baby?" I asked. "Like other families," she said, "with a mommy and a daddy who live together and don't have scary men around all the time." I thought about how to answer that. We were as normal as we had ever been, but normal was a relative concept for a family like ours. "We're us," I said finally. "We're the Romano family, and we love each other very much. That's what matters most." She nodded seriously, then asked the question that really mattered to her. "Is Daddy going to stay this time?" "Yes, baby," I said with certainty. "Daddy is going to stay. We're all going to stay together." That night, Luca and I stood on the small balcony of our Brooklyn apartment, looking out at the city that had given us so much pain and so much joy. It wasn't 50 floors up, and the view wasn't as spectacular, but it was ours. "Do you ever miss it?" I asked. "The power, the respect, the fear." "Sometimes," he said honestly. "But then I come home to you and Sophia arguing about what movie to watch, or I see her drawing pictures of our family, or I wake up in the morning without wondering if today is the day someone tries to kill me. And I remember what I was actually living for all those years." We stood there in comfortable silence, his arm around my shoulders, watching the lights of Manhattan across the water. "You know," he said eventually, "Sophia asked me something yesterday that I've been thinking about." "What did she ask?" "She asked if we could have another baby," he said. "A little brother or sister for her to play with." I felt my breath catch. "What did you tell her?" "I told her that was something Mommy and I would have to talk about," he said. "But Isabella, I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'll support. If you want more children, if you want to focus on Sophia, if you want to wait, anything. This is your choice." I turned in his arms to face him fully. "What do you want?" I asked. "I want whatever makes you happy," he said. "I want whatever makes our family whole." I thought about it, about the life we had built and the future we were creating, about Sophia and her innocent question about siblings, about the man standing in front of me who had given up everything for love. "I want it all," I said finally. "I want more children with you. I want to build something beautiful out of all the broken pieces. I want to prove that love really can conquer everything." He kissed me then, deep and soft and full of promise. When we broke apart, he rested his forehead against mine. "Then let's build it," he said. "Let's build the most beautiful, chaotic, imperfect, perfect family anyone has ever seen." 6 months later, I found out I was pregnant again. When we told Sophia, She whooped with joy and immediately started planning how she would teach her new sibling everything she knew about being a Romano. The baby was born on a snowy December morning, almost exactly 2 years after Luca had walked back into our lives at the shelter. We named him Marcus, after Luca's grandfather, the one member of his family who had tried to steer him away from violence. Sophia was an amazing big sister, protective and gentle, and endlessly patient with her baby brother. Watching her with Marcus, seeing the way she naturally took on the role of protector and teacher, I could see echoes of both her parents in her developing personality. One evening, when Marcus was about 6 months old, the four of us were in our living room. Sophia was on the floor playing with her blocks while Marcus napped in his bouncy seat. Luca was reading a book, and I was working on homework for one of my classes. It was such an ordinary moment, so beautifully mundane, that it took my breath away. This was what I had dreamed of during those long nights when I was pregnant and alone. This was the family I had pictured but never quite believed we could have. Sophia looked up from her blocks and made an announcement that made us all smile. "I like our family," she said with satisfaction. "We're good at being together." "Yes, we are," Luca agreed, reaching over to ruffle her hair. "We're very good at being together." Later that night, after both children were asleep, Luca and I sat together on our small couch, my feet in his lap, talking about nothing and everything. "Do you think we made the right choices?" I asked. "All of them, from the very beginning." He considered this seriously. "I think we made the only choices we could make with the information we had at the time," he said. "And I think we were lucky that love was stronger than fear." "Most of the time," I agreed. "Most of the time," he repeated. "And on the days when it's not, we remind each other why we chose this." I thought about the journey that had brought us here, from the terrified young woman who had run away pregnant to the family we were now. It hadn't been easy, and it hadn't been simple, but it had been worth every moment of fear and uncertainty. "You know what I'm most grateful for?" I said. "What?" he asked. "That Sophia will grow up knowing what it looks like when people choose love over everything else," I said. "She'll grow up knowing that families can be complicated and messy and still be beautiful. She'll never have to wonder if she's worth fighting for." "And Marcus will grow up knowing his father as a man of peace," Luca added. "He'll never see the violence, never have to carry the weight of blood that I carried. He gets to be innocent in ways I never was." We sat there in the quiet of our home, surrounded by the evidence of the life we had built together. Sophia's drawings on the refrigerator, Marcus's toys scattered around the room, family photos covering every available surface. It wasn't the life either of us had planned. It wasn't perfect, and it hadn't come without sacrifice. But it was ours, and it was real, and it was built on the foundation of a love that had survived exile, danger, fear, and the complete reconstruction of everything we thought we wanted. As I drifted off to sleep that night, wrapped in Luca's arms with our children breathing safely in the rooms nearby, I thought about the woman I had been 3 years ago. She had been so afraid, so certain that love and safety were mutually exclusive, so convinced that choosing one meant losing the other. But she had been wrong. Sometimes love was the most dangerous choice you could make. But sometimes it was also the only choice that led to real safety. The kind that came not from hiding, but from having people who would fight for you. People who would choose you over everything else. People who would rebuild their entire world just to keep you in it. Sometimes love was everything. And sometimes everything was enough. The years that followed were filled with the ordinary magic of family life. Sophia started elementary school and brought home friends and stories and art projects that covered our refrigerator. Marcus learned to walk and talk and developed a stubborn streak that reminded everyone of his parents. I finished my degree and found work at a nonprofit that helped families in crisis, using my own experience to guide others through their darkest moments. Luca's consulting business grew, built on referrals and reputation rather than fear and obligation. We bought a house in Queens with a backyard where the children could play and a kitchen big enough for the loud, chaotic dinners that became our family tradition. It wasn't mansion, but it was perfect for us. On Sophia's 8th birthday, she made a wish that brought tears to my eyes. When I asked her what she had wished for, she said she had wished that our family could stay exactly the way it was forever. "I want Marcus to stay little enough to need me, but big enough to play with," she explained seriously. "And I want you and Daddy to stay happy like you are now. And I want us to always have Sunday pancakes and story time." Those simple wishes, born from the security of a child who had never doubted her place in the world, were everything we had fought for. They were proof that love really could create something beautiful out of chaos, that families really could heal from even the deepest wounds. That night, as Luca and I sat on our back porch watching our children chase fireflies in the growing dusk, he said something that perfectly captured what we had built together. "You know what the best part is?" he said. "What?" I asked. "They'll never know how close we came to losing this," he said. "To them, this is just normal. This is just how families are supposed to be." And maybe that was the greatest gift we could give them. The knowledge that love was supposed to be safe, that families were supposed to be together, that parents were supposed to choose their children over everything else in the world. We had started with nothing but love and hope and the determination to build something better than what we had known. And somehow, against all odds, we had succeeded. We had created exactly the family we had dreamed of, exactly the life we had fought for. And every morning when I woke up to the sound of children laughing and Luca making coffee and the beautiful chaos of the life we had built together, I was reminded that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is also the most necessary. Sometimes you have to risk everything for love. And sometimes, if you're very lucky and very brave, love risks everything right back. Thank you so much for listening to this story. We would love to know where you're listening from. So, please drop a comment and say hello. If you enjoyed this, be sure to subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for many more to come. We can't wait to read your thoughts in the comments below.